Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Morton. My pronouns are she, her. I am the artist and studio manager here at Baltimore Clayworks. We are thrilled that you all have joined us. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining from my office located on Piscataway and Susquehannock land, currently known as Baltimore, Maryland. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk today given by Shea Kister. She is a long-term resident artist. Please join us again on December 6th when we will have a talk by Kieran Joan, and on December 13th when we have Patrick Bell. For more information about these artists, please visit baltimoreclayworks.org. I will now turn it over to Deshay.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Rebecca, for that intro. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. And all right. So as Rebecca said, my name is Shea Kister. My pronouns are she, her. And I would like to say thank you once again for Rebecca and for everybody for putting this all together. It's very exciting. And as she said, I'm one of the new long-term residents here at Baltimore Clayworks, and I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. And so in this talk, I'm going to be chatting about my background, my education, and then I'll be diving a little bit more into depth about my most recent body of work from my MFA thesis exhibition that I completed this last May. And so I really started my ceramics journey, my ceramics career in my undergrad. And I attended my undergrad at the University of South Dakota, studying under Michael Hill. And this is a photo of him, some examples of his work, and a photo of the outdoor kiln yard there with a nice sunset in the background. It was always so wonderful firing when sunsets were happening. It's very, very beautiful there in South Dakota. And at the University of South Dakota is really where I found my love of ceramics. Once I got put on my first candling shift on a wood fire, I was hooked, and I've been hooked ever since. But I didn't start out in ceramics in undergrad. Hold on, technical difficulties. There it is. So originally I was a printmaking major when I first got to USD, and then I moved into a photography major. And then finally in my senior year of undergrad, I settled on ceramics. But I'm really difficult for my indecisiveness at that time. And it was while I was a photography major and I started taking ceramics classes that I was introduced to overglazed decals. And so that allowed me to put the photographs that I was taking onto the ceramic vessels that I was making, trying to marry the two mediums together. But ultimately, I was spending a lot more time in the ceramic studio and got a lot more enjoyment out of that. And so that is where I ultimately decided to go. And another really formative part of my undergraduate was atmospheric firing. Like I said, once that first candling shift at a wood fire, I've been hooked ever since. And I got introduced to salt firing, wood firing, and soda firing while I was at USD. And it will always be my first love in ceramics, atmospheric firing forever. And it's something I always gravitate back to when I am not sure what new body of work to start or what I really want to start making next. I will always gravitate back to atmospheric firing and the love of the skill and technicality of it, and spontaneity and community, and everything about it is what I hold near and dear to my heart. And then these are some of the works that I was making at the end of my undergraduate journey. I graduated in 2017. And these are some electric fired works, as well as some soda fired works. And really focusing on more functional works, starting to get a little more sculptural, but really my primary focus in undergrad was functional work. And After I graduated in 2017, I applied to graduate school and I ultimately did not get accepted anywhere. So I stayed in Vermilion at USD for an extra year just to practice and hone in my skills on the wheel and firing techniques and all of that, as well as I moved back home for a year to Nebraska. And I worked at my old high school as a paraprofessional, and I was ultimately really grateful for that opportunity. I got to continue to work in the art room after school on the wheel to continue to make work and apply to graduate school again, where I ultimately was accepted to Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas, and studied under Nick Giannakopoulos. This is a photo of him and some examples of his work. And while I was there, in the first couple of weeks, he completely broke open the idea I thought I had of what ceramics was. And he introduced me to putting low fire glaze on a high fire piece of work that was already fired. So I was still atmospheric firing a lot, still making a lot of functional work, but I really wanted those bright colors that I couldn't seem to hold on to at Cone 10 atmospheric. And he came up to me one day and said, well, why don't we just put this low fire glaze right on top of it and refire it? And that just blew my mind. I didn't know that could be done. I've heard of refiring ceramics, but not really to this capacity. And so these are some examples of some work that I was testing out glazes and their fluidity on more vertical surfaces and how they could run into each other and make more of a bright colored, more cloud-like scene on top of that, but still having that lush, atmospheric, unpredictable kind of surface with it. And another really formative experience that happened within my first semester in graduate school was Mike Strumbus. He's a fellow ceramic artist, and he came and did a workshop at Kansas State University, a soda fire workshop. And to this day, when I soda fire, I use his firing profile and all of his tips and tricks that he came and shared with us at K-State. And that happening in my first semester really changed how I was atmospheric firing and how I was soda firing and what kind of surface that I knew now that I could get on my work. And this is some examples of those some soda fired mugs with low fire glaze layers on top of it, as well as getting more layers on there. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But some overglazed decals and some luster happening as well. And so I only got one real semester of grad school before the pandemic hit. And even though I was unable to go to the ceramic studio, I was taking some figure drawing classes as well. And so I kept practicing with my figure drawing and using that, looking back at old family photos and old journals, and really sketching and drawing a lot while the pandemic was in full swing. And another exciting experience that I was introduced to within my first couple of semesters at K-State in graduate school was 3D printing in clay. You know, you hear of 3D printing and how cool and awesome it is, but once you realize that there are 3D printers that can print in ceramic clay and any clay body you want, you're like a little kid in the candy store and you just want to do it over and over and over. And so this is some examples of that, about how a program called Potterware, you can design really anything in this simple to use program, and then how it will transform into clay. Can you see my cursor? If you can see these little loops, gravity obviously is going to pull them down. And so I thought that was really exciting, the way you can design something and it might turn out a little bit different once it's printed. And one of my main goals when I entered grad school was to get more sculptural with my work. I was making a lot of functional work. My favorite things are mugs and jars, and to this day I still love making them, but I wanted to get a little bit more sculptural with my work. And after being introduced to 3D printing, I wanted to experiment with some more complicated mold making as well, and use both of those two newfound skills to create something. And so the orange chair there I have in the second photo, I 3D scanned that life-size chair and had a full scan of it. And then I fixed the scan so there were no holes, and I patched the scan where I couldn't quite get in a program called Mesh Mixer. So then I can ultimately 3D print a tiny chair, and that way I could make a mold out of plaster of this tiny chair, and it ended up being about a 6-part mold, and I had never made anything with that many pieces before. I've only ever made a 2-part mold before that, so it was quite a learning experience, and that it really took some patience, as you can see some of the failed 3D printed versions there. But that was exciting, and it broke up in a whole new technology for me that I didn't even know really existed in ceramics. And so I then was able to slip cast multiples of this tiny chair with these methods. And these next couple of slides are some pieces that include this slip cast tiny chair. This is just a detail of the previous work. And I started using cold surfaces as well in my work. The gold is applied gold leaf. It's not luster. Trying to get more sculptural. And also during that time when I was experimenting with a little bit more sculptural pieces, I was still thinking about and making functional work. And I started to add more and more layers of that with the refiring. And so these are some examples of that. And so I would start out with firing each piece to cone 6. I would clear glaze it and fire it to cone 6. And then I would add cone 06 low fire glaze on top, sometimes 1, 2, 3 layers, just depending on what the composition ended up needing. And then I would apply overglazed decals of old family photos that I've traced out, or images that reminded me of something from my childhood, and fire that to cone 010. And then I would either use mother of pearl or gold luster to give it some shine, some accent moments. And then, as I was saying, I started using cold surfaces as well in these next 2 slides, this slide and the next slide. In that case, it would be flocking. And flocking, you can think of how they get fake snow on Christmas trees. That is what flocking is. I like to call it loose felt. It's very exciting and soft to the touch. And I love the texture difference that it can create within a piece. And so coming into my 3rd year of graduate school, my final year, I started to think a lot more about my thesis exhibition, and I knew I really wanted my focus to be on sculptural work. And so these are some of my early raw clay sculptural attempts. I started using spikes to represent. And I've always been interested in how trauma, no matter how big or small, can affect memories as well as personal and social relationships. And here's some more examples of some sculptural work. And so for my thesis exhibition titled Please Sit Down, I focused on creating more manifestations about how infallible and indescribable feelings and emotions can be outwardly represented. And this body of work really emerged from my own exasperation of and for the limits of language, whether that be spoken or written, my own personal limits. And so in the next couple of slides, you'll see this reoccurring box structure. And each of these is a manifestation of an intangible emotion. And the box structure really represents the physical and mental compartmentalization system for those emotions that I can really picture in my brain the compartmentalization of. And these are examples of my thesis exhibition this past May. And even when I switched gears to making more sculptural work in my third year, my mind would always wander back to functional forms and how I could get more sculptural with my functional forms. And as I was throwing and hand rolling a lot of these spike forms for my thesis exhibition, I started to wonder, what if I put that on a mug? What would that do? What would that look like? And so I started making what I have deemed my spiky mugs, and I'm still making those currently here in Baltimore, and I'm excited to see how they grow, evolve, and change. I've started putting the spikes in different areas to either obstruct or further help you situate your hand around the mug. And I keep adding layers and layers of glaze and cold surface applications to these to try to get them more sculptural while still being a functional mug. Some of them are more functional than others. Some of them are just pieces to look nicely at, but I'm excited to see how they change while I'm here. I haven't started a new body of work quite yet with the holidays being so close, trying to get some work done for that. But pretty soon I'll be continuing on from my body of work, from my thesis exhibition body of work, and making some new pieces that still fit that theme. And I'm excited to see where it all goes. I'm excited to be here. And that is the end of the talk.